The first time Ellis heard the voice, he thought he had imagined it. He was alone in the rehearsal hall on the fourth floor of the Harmon Center for the Arts 3 weeks before opening night of the season's most ambitious program, and it was past 11 o'clock. The cleaning crew had come and gone. The building had settled into that particular late-night silence that only old performance halls produce. A silence that has texture to it, something between held breath and absence. Ellis had been standing at the piano, working through a passage in the third movement that was not yet landing the way he needed it to land, pressing the same 12 bars over and over with 2 fingers while the rest of him listened, and then rising from somewhere below and outside, climbing through the October air and finding its way through the cracked rehearsal window, came a baritone voice singing a single long phrase, 4 notes, a fifth, a resolve, clean as a plucked string, warm as something remembered. Ellis lifted his fingers off the keys. He stood there and said nothing, because there was no one to say anything to. He crossed to the window and looked down at the plaza below, the wide sweep of granite and the lampposts throwing their amber circles in the dark. He saw the bench near the east entrance. He saw the man sitting on it, a paper bag at his feet and a thin coat pulled around his shoulders, head tilted back just slightly. Singing into the night as though the night owed him nothing, and he owed it everything. He had no idea whose window was open above him. He had no idea who was listening. That was the part that mattered. That was the part that would not leave Ellis alone for the rest of that night, or the nights that followed. His name was Raymond Cole, and he had been sleeping outside the Harmon Center for 6 weeks. The center had a covered arch on the east side, a narrow channel between the building's main wall and a low decorative partition, just deep enough to block the wind from the north. Raymond had found it in early September, when the nights were still mild enough that the stone floor did not seep cold through his sleeping bag. He had 2 bags, a blue one that had once belonged to a youth soccer league, and a grey one he had found, folded on a park bench near the river, with a handwritten note taped to it that said, "Take this if you need it." He needed it. He had needed a great many things by that September, and not one of them had arrived through any door he had thought to look in. Raymond was 54 years old. He had spent the previous 22 years in this city, the first 12 of them employed, the last 10 in a slow and greedy recession that had taken everything in no particular order, and with no particular announcement. First, the teaching position, when the district cut its arts budget and his classroom was the one that went. Then the apartment, which he had held for 3 years as after losing the job, until the last of his savings ran down. Then the storage unit, where he had kept his books and his record collection and a mahogany music stand his father had given him, all of which he had sold for a combined total of $140. What he had kept was a photograph of his former students, a wallet-sized class picture from the year they had won the district choir competition, faces he still carried by name, and a small wooden pitch pipe on a cord round his neck. It was worn smooth at the mouthpiece. He had carried it for 30 years. It was the first instrument he had ever bought with his own money, for $6 from a music supply shop that no longer existed, the summer before he started his first teaching job. Raymond had not always slept outside. He had cycled through the shelter system for several years, and he knew its rhythms and its seasons, knew which intake workers wrote down what you told them, and which ones wrote down what was easier to process. He had aged into a kind of invisibility that the city extends to certain men, the ones who are not young enough to be a concern and not old enough to be an emergency, who exist in the middle distance of a metropolis's attention, present but unaccounted for. He did not drink, he did not use. He had a card with a caseworker's number on it that he called every 2 weeks from a phoned at the library branch on Clement Street, and the caseworker, a young woman named Priya, who had a photograph of a golden retriever on her desk, and who always sounded like she genuinely wanted to help, told him each time that she was working on it, that there were more people than units, that she had not forgotten him. He believed her. He was a man who had spent a career teaching children to believe things worth believing, and he found it impossible to stop. What Raymond had left entirely intact was his voice. He had been a baritone since his late teens, a voice that his own music teacher, an elderly man named Mr. Dubois, who wore the same brown cardigan every day and kept a pitch pipe in his breast pocket, had called a gift given for giving away. Raymond had understood even then what that meant. A voice like his was not for sitting still. It was for reaching the back of a room, for finding the child in the third row who had tuned out, for making the notes mean something to someone who had decided notes did not mean anything to them. He had given it away every day for 12 years, in a classroom on the third floor of Crestview Elementary, room 14, a room with a water stain shaped like a swan on the ceiling and a broken third key on the upright piano that you learned to work around. He sang outside the concert hall because the acoustics were good. That was the honest reason. The granite plaza created a particular kind of open resonance, the way a canyon does, and on clear nights he could hear himself better there than anywhere else in the city. He sang old songs, spirituals mostly, and some of the warm-up exercises he had used in his classroom, the ones that opened the chest and cleared the register, the ones he had drilled into his students, so thoroughly that some of them had almost certainly forgotten where they first learned them. He did not perform for the people who passed. He did not hold out a cup or a hat. He sang because it was the one thing that remained entirely his. The one practice the last decade had not been able to take from him, and every night he sat on that bench or stood near the arch and he sang, and the city went around him, and the night received what he offered. He had no idea that the fourth-floor window was open. He had no idea that the man behind it had stopped what he was doing and was standing very still. Ellis Vance had been appointed principal conductor of the Harmon Symphony at 41, the youngest in the orchestra's 83-year history, and the first black conductor to hold the position. He had been profiled in publications he had read as a child, had shaken hands with people whose recordings he had worn out on a second-hand turntable in his mother's apartment, and had conducted in 11 countries. None of that had made him comfortable with the third movement, which was still not landing. He came back the next Tuesday, and the one after that, staying late, staying long after the cleaning crew finished, and both nights the voice came again at about the same time, just past 11. The second night Ellis opened the window wider. The third night he stood at the glass for 30 minutes before he went back to the piano, and when he sat down he found himself playing the pitch the man had opened on, a low G, and listening for the overtones in the room. He did not go down. He told himself he was respecting the man's privacy, that a person singing alone at night in a public plaza had not asked for an audience. He told himself this several times. It was partly true. The other part was that the voice had done something to him that he did not fully want to examine, something that felt like the edge of a recognition he could not place, a note that matched something in his own register, that he had not consciously called up. He knew what that feeling meant in music. It meant you were close to something. The fourth week of October brought rain. 3 days of it, low and steady, the kind of rain that does not announce itself and does not apologize. On the third night of rain, Ellis was at the piano again, later than usual, and he realized after a while that he had been listening for the voice and not hearing it. He sat with that absence for a moment. He gathered his score and his coat. He told himself he was leaving, which was true. He told himself he was going to go out the east exit because it was closer to the parking structure, which was not true. He had parked on the west side. The covered arch was on the east side of the building, and that was where Raymond was, in his blue sleeping bag with the grey one folded over it, not singing tonight because the rain was too heavy, and his chest had been aching for 3 days with something he was hoping was not what he suspected it was. He had his pitch pipe out and was turning it over in his fingers in the dark, an old habit, the way some people work a rosary. He heard the door open and a figure in a dark coat came around the partition and stopped when it registered that the space was occupied. Ellis looked at the man on the ground, and the man on the ground looked up at Ellis, and neither of them said anything for a long moment. Raymond registered the coat first, good wool, the kind that hangs from the shoulders correctly, then the face, A black man in his mid-40s, close-cut hair going grey at the temples, expression open rather than startled, which was not what Raymond was used to when people discovered him in a doorway. Ellis registered the cord around the man's neck first. Something small and wooden hanging from it, the kind of object a person keeps because it means something, rather than because it is useful. Then the man's posture, which was dignified even sitting on a concrete floor, shoulders back, hands still. "You've been singing out here," Ellis said. It was not a question. "Most nights," Raymond said. Ellis crouched down so they were nearer to eye level. "Your voice carries," he said. "Fourth floor, east wing." Raymond looked at the building's face for a moment, calculating. "The rehearsal rooms," he said. "I didn't know anyone was up there that late. Usually I'm not." Ellis paused. "You're not well." Raymond did not deny it. "Chest cold, I think." "Maybe more." "Have you been seen by anyone?" "I've been seen by a great many people," Raymond said, and there was no bitterness in it. Only a dry precision that had once served him well in a classroom when a student tried to be clever. Something in the delivery made Ellis go still for a second. He sat down on the low partition ledge across from Raymond, getting his coat wet, not minding. "What's your name?" he said. "Raymond Cole." Ellis heard the name and let it sit. He did not reach for it immediately. There are names you know and names you almost know, and the space between them is where certain kinds of grief live. "I'm Ellis," he said. He did not add the last name. Not yet. "Where were you before all this?" It was not a prying question. Raymond heard the shape of it, the way a musician hears phrasing, and he understood that the man was asking not from curiosity but from something closer to kinship, the way you ask a fellow traveller which road they came in on. "I taught music," Raymond said. "Elementary school. 12 years. He paused. "Crestview. Room 14. The silence that followed was of a different quality than the silence before. Ellis sat in it without moving. The rain came down outside the arch and made a curtain of sound at the edge of the space, and inside the arch, everything was very quiet. He heard his own breathing. He heard Raymond's, which was not right, too shallow, catching slightly at the end of the exhale, and he heard, underneath both of those, something he had been carrying so long he had nearly stopped noticing the weight of it. A name, a room number, a water stain shaped like a swan. "There was a crack in the third key of the piano," Ellis said. His voice had changed. "You had to press it on the left side or it buzzed." Raymond lifted his head. He looked at this man in the wool coat, sitting on a wet ledge in the rain. He looked at him the way you look at something you have wondered about for a long time, carefully, making sure the wonder is earned. "Mr. Cole," he said finally. And he was not talking to himself. He was remembering the way a boy of 10 had said it from the second row, a small boy with serious eyes, and a notebook he filled with things nobody had told him to write down. He was remembering the boy's mother at the winter concert, the way she had held her program like a program meant something. He was remembering a report card notation in which he had written that Ellis had an ear most adults never develop. He should have everything he needs to go as far as he chooses to go. "Ellis," Raymond said, and now the name came out as what it was. A child he had loved, grown and standing in front of him, and Raymond, who had kept his composure through 10 years of loss without weeping in front of strangers, pressed his free hand flat against the concrete floor and breathed very carefully. Ellis sat with it. He did not rush to speak. There are moments that deserve their own weight, and this was one of them. A man he had not seen in 34 years. A man whose classroom had been the first place. Ellis had understood that music was a language he was already fluent in, sitting on a cold floor in the rain because the world had not paid its debts. He thought about the 12 bars that had not been landing. He thought about the voice he had heard coming through the window, night after night. The voice he had known was unlike anything he had heard in years, without knowing why he knew it so certainly. The truth was he had known. He had not wanted to know, because knowing would have required something of him. If you have ever watched a good person decide to do the right thing, you know it does not always look like resolution. Sometimes it looks like a man very quietly putting a question away and picking up the next thing. "Can you stand?" Ellis said. "Yes," Raymond said. "I can stand." Ellis helped him up. Raymond was thinner than he looked sitting down. and the chest cold was audible up close, a rasp underneath the surface of each breath that Ellis did not like. He picked up the blue bag and the grey one. Raymond reached for them, and Ellis shook his head once and carried them himself. They went through the east door and into the building's warmth, and Ellis took Raymond to the green room on the second floor, which had a couch and a small bathroom and a thermostat on the wall, and he turned the heat on and told Raymond to stay there while he made a phone call. The call was to Marcus Webb, the orchestra's general manager, who had known Ellis for 18 years, and who answered on the second ring even though it was nearly midnight. Ellis explained what had happened in the concise, factual way he explained most things. Marcus said nothing for a moment and then said, "I'll call Dr. Fontaine in the morning." He paused. "Ellis," a second pause. "You all right?" Ellis said that he was, and hung up the phone. He went back to the green room. Raymond was sitting on the couch with the pitch pipe in his palm, not turning it anymore, just holding it. The heat was on. The rain was audible against the window. Raymond said, without looking up, "I used to wonder where you went. I knew you went somewhere good. I could always tell the ones who were going somewhere." He stopped. He had not meant to say that much. He folded his hands around the pitch pipe. "You want to tell me what happened?" Ellis said. Raymond told him. It took a while. He told it the same way he had always told a story to a classroom, without decorating it, without pulling for sympathy, letting the facts carry the weight, because the facts were sufficient. He told it in plain order. The budget cut, the apartment, the storage unit, the $140 Priya at the caseworker's office, the blue sleeping bag from the soccer league. He did not cry. He did not editorialize. He told it the way a man tells it who has made his peace with it and still wants the telling to be honest. Ellis listened the way Raymond had taught him to listen, which was with the whole body, not just the ears. When Raymond finished, Ellis said, "I've been using that warm-up exercise for 30 years. The one you built into the last 15 minutes of every class. Open the chest. Climb the fifth, resolve. Every single orchestra I have worked with, I use it. I've never told anyone where it came from." He looked at Raymond directly. "I've never told anyone." Raymond looked at him for a long moment. "The one in G," he said. "The one in G," Ellis said. "That's what I heard you singing the first night. I didn't know it was you. I just knew I had never heard anyone else phrase it that way." This was the thing about a kindness given freely. It does not stay in the place you left it. It moves through the world, the way a song moves, picked up, carried, set down somewhere new, sung by someone who learned it from someone who learned it from someone. The origin growing distant, but the music remaining always. Raymond had given that exercise away 1,100 times in 12 years to every child who came through room 14, and one of those children had carried it out into the world and up the ladder of every achievement the world could offer, and had never once sung it. Without Raymond in it, without the warm ghost of a man his ear was a gift and meant it absolutely. Raymond sat with that. He let it settle into the places where the last 10 years had made room. What Ellis did in the weeks that followed, he did methodically and without fanfare. Dr. Fontaine saw Raymond the next morning and confirmed the chest cold, treated it aggressively, and flagged 2 other things that required attention and that were caught early enough to be handled. Marcus Webb called Priya at the caseworker's office, and there was a housing voucher in place within 2 weeks. Not because Ellis demanded it, but because Marcus was very good at his job and because Priya had, in fact, not forgotten Raymond and was glad to have the call. The apartment was on the 4th floor of a building on Larimer Street, 12 blocks from the concert hall, with a window that faced west and a kitchen that got the evening light. The paid position came later in January, when the Harmon's community education director, a woman named Cynthia Park, who ran the program with the focused energy of someone who had chosen the work entirely on purpose, sat with Raymond for 2 hours and asked him questions that were not condescending and listened to his answers with the attention of someone who understood what she was looking at. She offered him a part-time role as a vocal coach for the youth choir program. 12 students, Thursdays and Saturdays, a classroom in the centre's south wing with a working piano and a window and enough room to breathe. Raymond said yes without hesitating. The orchestra season opened in November, and Ellis dedicated the program to 3 teachers he had carried his whole career. He did not read their names from the stage, he said them aloud. A high school band director, a conservatory professor, and a man named Raymond, who taught elementary school choir, and who gave away everything he knew because he understood that a voice, and the love of music, and the belief that beauty is for everyone, and not only for the people who can afford a ticket, those are not possessions. They are seeds. You give them away and you trust the ground. Raymond was in the audience that night, in a seat in the 8th row that Ellis had arranged without telling him it was arranged, wearing a jacket he had not owned a month before. He had the pitch pipe in his jacket pocket. He always had it. When the orchestra opened the 3rd movement, the one that had not been landing for 3 weeks in October, he heard it land. He heard the 12 bars resolve the way 12 bars resolve when the person conducting them has stopped trying to force them and has simply allowed them to be what they are. He recognized that transition. He had spent 12 years teaching it. You stop pushing the note and you let the note find its place. He did not applaud loudly. He was not a loud applause man. He clapped with his hands at chest height, steady and even, the way he had taught his students to receive something that had been done well, because receiving well is also a skill and someone should teach it. By spring, the Thursday and Saturday sessions in the South Wing classroom had grown to 19 students, because word travels the way it always travels when something real is happening in a room. Cynthia Park had added a 2nd cohort. Raymond arrived before any of them, opened the windows if the weather permitted, set the chairs in a semicircle, and stood at the front of the room with the pitch pipe in his hand. He gave the note. They found it. He took them up a 5th, held it, brought them home. Every time. He told them, as he had told 12 years of students before them, that the voice is not a performance. It is a practice, and a practice is not something you do when conditions are perfect. It is something you do because showing up is itself the point. Some of them wrote it down. The ones who wrote it down were the ones he watched most closely, because he knew what it meant when a child reached for a notebook without being told to. Ellis came down to sit in on the class one Tuesday in March. He came in quietly and took a seat in the back, and Raymond saw him and gave no signal, just continued. He was working with a girl of about 11, a serious girl named Danny, who had been afraid to open her mouth at full volume for the first 3 weeks, and who had, in the previous session, suddenly let go and produced a sound that startled her and then made her laugh out loud, which had been the right response. Today she was not afraid. She was standing, with her hands at her sides and her chin up, and she was singing the exercise, the one in G, climbing the 5th, and she did not know where it came from or how many hands had held it before hers, how many rooms it had passed through, how many children had stood in exactly this posture and found exactly this note. She only knew that it was hers now, and that the man at the front of the room had given it to her, because he believed she could carry it. Raymond stood with the pitch pipe at his side and watched her, and the morning light came through the west-facing window and landed across the floor. Between them and Danny held the note and held it and held it, and it was a good note, it was a fine note. It was a note that would go out into the world when she left this room and be someone else's someday, passed along in ways neither of them would ever be able to trace. The pitch pipe was warm in his hand. It had always been warm. Have you ever known someone who kept giving, even when the world had taken almost everything? Leave a comment below and tell us about them. And if this story moved you, there's another one waiting for you right here. There was a girl in the 2nd row of Raymond's first ever cohort at Crestview whose name was Destiny. And Destiny had a tendency to close her mouth on the top notes because she was afraid of what she sounded like when she opened it fully. Raymond had seen this before and would see it again, and it was one of the things he took most seriously, because a child who learns to close her mouth rather than risk the note is a child who will spend her life stopping short. He spent 3 weeks on Destiny alone, not singling her out, just finding ways to make the top note the safest place in the room. He did this by opening his own mouth first, every time, and showing her exactly what it looked like when a person committed. By December, she was singing higher than anyone in the room and looking directly at him when she did it, like she was giving him something back. That was the thing about room 14. Raymond did not run it as a performance space. He ran it as a practice space, and the difference mattered. A performance space is about what other people see. A practice space is about what you are becoming. He brought that same understanding to every room he ever stood in, including the cold ones, including the ones that had no roof, including the nights on the granite plaza when his audience was a lamppost and a curtain of city dark. He was always practicing. He was always in the process of becoming something, even when the world's accounting of his situations suggested there was nothing left to become. He did not accept that accounting. He kept the pitch pipe, he kept his voice, he kept the belief which his own teacher, Mr. Dubois, had planted in him when he was 9 years old and sitting in the second row with his mouth closed on the top notes, that a voice given away is not a voice diminished, it is a voice multiplied. The night Ellis came outside in the rain and sat down on the wet ledge across from him. Raymond had been awake for a long time before the east door opened. His chest was aching and the rain was steady, and he had been doing what he did on the nights when sleep would not come, which was to go through the names. He kept a list in his memory of every student he had taught, whose name he still carried with certainty. There were 93 of them. He went through them alphabetically by first name: Alyssa, Andre, Brianna, Calvin, Destiny, Devon. He had not gotten to the E names in a while. When Ellis sat down across from him on the ledge and said his name, and Raymond understood who was in front of him, his mind was already on its way there, already moving through the list the way it moved on the sleepless nights. And when the face in front of him resolved into the boy from the second row, Raymond felt the list arrive at E and stop, the way a song stops at its last note and holds the silence that follows it, which is also part of the song. He thought about the winter concert that year Ellis was in his class. The Harmon Center had not been there yet. This was a different building. A school gymnasium with folding chairs and fluorescent light and a paper banner the art teacher had made. The parents sat in those chairs, and the children stood on a set of portable risers that Raymond and the custodian had assembled the afternoon before, and Raymond had stood in front of them in his good blazer, the one he wore for performances, and given them the pitch, and they had found it together. 12 children who had spent 11 weeks learning to trust the space between a note and the next one. And when they opened their mouths in that gym, the sound they made was bigger than any of them had produced alone. That was the thing. That was always the thing. Alone, a voice is a voice. Together, voices are an argument for something. For what, exactly? He had always let the music say, because the music said it better than he could. Ellis, in that concert, had stood 2 children from the left end of the second row, and had sung with his hands folded in front of him, and his eyes not on Raymond but on the middle distance, on some private point of concentration that Raymond had recognized immediately as the posture of a child who was not just singing, but listening to the whole of it, the chord the group was making together, trying to hear his own voice in relation to all the others. That was not a skill you taught. You could show it, you could model it, but it was something a child either had or did not have, and the ones who had it knew something instinctively about belonging to a larger thing without losing themselves in it. Raymond had written it down in the notebook he kept then, a spiral-bound notebook with a music staff on the cover where he had written LSV, second row, naturally ensemble-minded, listens to the whole. He had written more about him across the months. He had written simply, "This one will go somewhere." He had not imagined how far. The morning after Ellis found him in the arch, Raymond woke on the couch in the green room to light coming through a high window and the smell of coffee, which turned out to be from a paper cup that Ellis had left on the side table with a note that said, "Dr. Fontaine, 9 a.m. Marcus will bring you. He lies will come. Be ready." Raymond looked at the note for a moment. The last line was not something a 41-year-old man wrote to a stranger. It was something a person wrote to someone whose character they had been carrying for a long time, and were glad to have confirmed. Raymond put the note in his jacket pocket next to the pitch pipe. Marcus Webb arrived at 8:30, a compact and efficient man, with a planner in his hand who shook Ramsden first and then explained what would happen at 9 and what would happen after that, and who spoke to Raymond the way competent people speak when they are not trying to manage you, which was directly and without condescension. Raymond had spent 10 years navigating systems that spoke to him as though his circumstances were a permanent identity rather than a condition, and Marcus's directness was one of the kindest things that had happened to him in a long time without meaning to be. He told Marcus this in those exact words, and Marcus said, "Good," and looked at his planner doctor. Fontaine was a thorough physician who asked questions and waited for the answers and wrote down what Raymond said rather than what was easier to record. The chest cold was bacterial, easily treated. The two other things were caught where catching them still made the catching meaningful. Raymond sat in his exam room after and looked at his hands for a while. He thought about the students he would not have been in the room for, if the catching had happened later or not at all. He thought about Danny, who he had not met yet but who was, at that moment, somewhere in the city going about her 11-year-old life, unaware that a classroom in the south wing of the Harmon Center was going to be waiting for her in January with a man who had been carrying her note for 30 years without knowing her name. The apartment on Larimer Street had a radiator that made a sound like someone knocking softly at the end of each heating cycle, a sound Raymond found, over the weeks he had been in the apartment, to be a genuinely comforting presence rather than an annoyance. The previous tenant had left a small bookshelf in the kitchen, and Raymond had begun filling it from the library's used book sale, $1 a book, mostly paperbacks. The window faced west and caught the afternoon light, and in the evenings, if he stood at it, he could see the upper floors of the Harmon Center 6 blocks away. The fourth-floor windows illuminated in the late evening when rehearsals ran long. Sometimes, on the mild nights that still came in late October, he opened his own window and sang into the space between the buildings. Not for any audience, not even for the acoustics, but because it was what he did. Because practice does not stop being practice when the conditions change. Because you are always in the process of becoming something, even after you have already become more than you imagined. He told Cynthia Park on the day she offered him the position that he had one condition, which was that the classroom have a piano with working keys. She said that was not a condition but a given, and took him down the hall to show him the instrument, an upright Kawai in serviceable condition with a middle C that rang clean. He pressed it once, listened to it decay, and told her he'd see her Thursday. The first Thursday, 2 students arrived early and stood in the hall looking uncertain. A boy named Trevor, who was 11, and a girl named Jade, who was 9, and who was holding a folder of sheet music she had brought from home like a credential. Raymond opened the door for them and told them to come in and pick any chair in the semicircle. He set his jacket on the back of the front chair and took the pitch pipe from its cord and held it up so they could see it. He told them what it was and what it did. Jade asked how old it was, and he told her 30 years, which made Trevor's eyes go slightly wider in the way children's eyes go slightly wider when they are confronted with a number that exceeds their own. Age by a significant margin. Raymond said, "It's just a piece of wood. It knows the note. That's all you need something to do." He gave the pitch. They found it. The session began. By the time winter turned towards spring, Raymond had 16 students who knew his voice and trusted it. And 3 of them had already developed the posture he watched for, the hands at sides, chin up, listening to the whole posture, the posture of a child who understands that their voice is part of something larger, and that being part of something larger is not a loss. He noted their names. He noted what he saw in them. He did not write it down in a notebook the way he once had. Not yet, but he was considering it. The music supply store on Henley Street had spiral-bound notebooks with blank covers, 3 for $7, and he had walked past them twice. The third time he bought one.